Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national broadcaster Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations and India's emergence as a provider of solutions to global problems. Viewers, in this episode we are doing a deep analysis of India's constructive diplomacy vis-a-vis one of the most burning questions roiling the international politics today, which is the Russia-Ukraine war. How has India stepped forward to provide solutions, big and small, to this rather intractable conflict? What more can India do to help preserve human life and property in this war theatre? And what are the larger implications of India's proactive role in this conflict theatre? These are the themes we are taking up, and I'm really privileged to introduce you to a domain expert and a very knowledgeable scholar and thinker and writer on these subjects, Dr. Swasti Rao.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Namaskar.
Dr. Swasti Rao is Associate Fellow at one of India's leading think tanks, the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses, and has been noted for her sharp and incisive analysis of issues relating to Europe and India. Dr. Rao, we have this conflict that's been raging for more than 2.5 years now.
Yeah, almost.
And since the onset in February 2022 until now, one thing that has stood out in India's diplomacy and the way we have approached this is this larger doctrine or approach of what we call multi-alignment. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently visited Poland and Ukraine.
Yes.
And one of the key phrases that he mentioned was that during this trip was that previously India used to be known for maintaining equal distance from all countries. He's referring to non-alignment. Yes. And then he says today we are pursuing a different path, which is to have equal closeness to all sides. And this really stood out. He's referring to his multi-alignment. So from a grand strategy point of view, from a Indian foreign policy perspective, big picture to start with, when you look at Russia-Ukraine war and you say multi-alignment, what exactly does it mean and how is it different from equidistance or non-alignment? And what do you think are the key parameters by which we have executed this multi-alignment in this conflict, which has actually been a big partisan divide where most people have taken sides on this side or that side, but how have we managed or threaded the needle of this multi-alignment?
Well, so there are a lot of questions in that one question. So first of all, thanks for having me here. I believe you are inching forward to your 100th episode and we are just one short of it. So congratulations to you for the sustained effort at bringing India's foreign policy to international audience as well. With respect to your question, and I think that was a very good vantage point about, breaking away from legacy issues. I think that India's and the Indian government, especially under the Modi government, the three times now, I mean, he's now Prime Minister for the third time. I think one of the things that the Modi government has done very successfully, and sometimes I feel it doesn't really get the credit for it the way it deserves, is this wonderful breakaway from legacy issues and trying to increase India's global footprint in areas that are of national interest to us. So for example, one of the area that comes to our mind, of course we keep talking about neighborhood and Africa and all of that, but then the other key area is of course Europe. And when we look at Europe, Dr. Chaulia, we have to basically look at our response and our evolving response in the Russia-Ukraine war. Now what everybody knows is that India has been neutral, and Prime Minister's historic visit to Kyiv, which is the first ever time for an Indian Prime Minister to visit Ukraine, independent Ukraine, after the 90s. I think it is very important in a lot of regards, and I will analytically tell you a few things that are related to the question that you asked me, which is first about multi-alignment. So the way I look at it and the way I have been writing about it, I have called it dehyphenation, which is that for the longest time, it was there, but Prime Minister's visit probably brought it to the foreground. It was somewhere embedded in the background earlier. So if you carefully understand the rationale behind India's multi-alignment, it means that India is always leaving room for maneuver whenever it requires to align with countries in national interest. In the case of Russia-Ukraine war, because it's been going on for so long, I think for the longest time, India's interpretation of the war or India's response to the war in many ways was perhaps determined or affected by India-Russia bilateral ties, which is a very valid way to go because Russia is a historic partner. But because the war has been going on for so long, and so has India's position in the war, kept evolving with respect to humanitarian assistance and larger role in the European security theatre, I think this dehyphenation was something which is required. By dehyphenation, what I mean is not disassociation, but dehyphenation is a recognition of the fact that our ties with Russia stand on their own versus our ties with Ukraine and the larger West will also stand on their own. And this is something which will enable us to play a more authentic role as bridging, as the role of being a bridge, between the two warring sides. Not just that, also a more authentic mediator whenever mediation happens, because you know that India has invested a lot of currency there in terms of coming out with innovative solutions. This phrase really stood out. And the third thing is about India's outreach in stabilizing the largest European theatre is also a point which probably will get better, I would say, context when we dehyphenate these things and look at them at their own merit instead of what we were doing earlier. So I think it was always there. It was in the government's approach, you would always see that, but perhaps Prime Minister's visit had, like I said, brought it to the foreground. And now I think we are entering a completely different era of a more active participation from the Indian side. And I'm also very happy that this is a time when we can actually have a debate on what really India's neutrality has been. Because India's neutrality has been misunderstood for being passive, for being disinterested, for being...
Prime Minister said actually we are not neutral in a passive sense.
Actually said, and that was a statement that needs to be deconstructed. The Prime Minister said that India is not neutral. What does he mean? I think, in my opinion, India's neutrality is not passive. It is an active and an evolving neutrality, which is capable of resetting and readjusting when the time comes, because it is that resilience that actually strengthens India's role as a mediator, that it is that resilience that allows India to send humanitarian aid. There have been about 17 consignments of humanitarian aid sent to Ukraine from India. Not just that, India has been a committed participant at all the global peace summits. I mean, for some reason in India, we were mostly only talking about the Swiss summit, where India did not join the final communique. We did not sign the joint communique. But there was not so much attention given to the fact that India has been always present right from Copenhagen. It started in Denmark, and even before, when we were trying to mediate around the grain deal, etc. India has always been very supportive. So from Copenhagen to Jeddah, which was attended by Shri Ajit Doval, where they made certain working groups to bring about tactical mediation around specific issues, to Malta and then Switzerland, and now we are looking forward to a new one. And President Zelensky has already said that it would be a good idea for India to do that. Now I'm not sure whether
if there's another peace summit,
global summit. Now I'm not sure whether India would be doing it. It would, of course, these are decisions which are affected by also larger logistics, but despite that, this conversation, this particular visit has been an enabler of conversations which are more authentic, which give more, credibility to India's role as a mediator, and which also go a long way in substantiating India's national interests.
Sure. Dr. Rao, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, made a revelation that messages have been passed between Russia and Ukraine, and also the Europeans and the Americans, and India has been a kind of a messenger for peace, and this comes in the backdrop of efforts to try and bring this war to a close. Although it's been grinding on, there is a fatigue, and eventually everybody would want to end this, right? And it cannot go on limitlessly. So in that context, you already mentioned the Black Sea grain deal. There's also the Zaporizhia nuclear plant and the safety concerns, because the fighting was going on right there in one of the largest nuclear power plants. So it's in that context that I'd like you to elaborate a little bit. What is this peace messenger business, and why would they want India to do it? I also recall when Prime Minister went to Austria a few months ago, the Austrian leadership was also saying that we're looking forward to Mr. Modi coming here because he's carrying some message from Russia for us. And so is it due to the breakdown of trust between the main parties in this war that they need somebody like an intermediary or a messenger? And why India? Why do you think they are choosing or looking to India, all sides, as opposed to some other, because there are many other so-called quote-unquote neutral countries who have tried to play some proactive role.
Right.
We've had Turkey, we've had Brazil. Yes. China is not exactly neutral and it's been very pro-Russia, but still they also have floated their own so-called peace proposal. And Saudi Arabia has hosted talks. There are so many countries that are trying to throw the hat in the ring. But why is it that India in particular seems to have the heft and also the credibility for this peace messenger kind of role?
Well, I mean, the short answer to that question is because of India's wonderful strategic pragmatism that India has been exercising ever since the war started. I mean, we did not bow down to any pressure, whether it was from the West, whether it was from Russia, to take any sides. We maintained it from the very beginning that we do not stand for war. This is not an era for war, okay? And this has probably been one of the most famous statements made by any world leader ever since the war has started. So I think part of this credibility is that we have really invested a lot of diplomatic effort, a lot of diplomatic maneuvering, and I think a lot of hard work generally to actually stay on India's side and not on anybody else's side. And we also held a very successful G20 presidency, if you remember.
Yes.
And at a time when the war was raging, the war is still raging. So I think these kind of this reliability and this consistency that India has built when it comes to its diplomatic stand and constant reaching out to whether it's Russia or the West. Also remember that India has excellent ties with the West. I would say India's ties with the larger West, which is Europe and the US, it's at an unprecedented high. I mean, right now when the Prime Minister and the high power delegation with the External Affairs Minister Shri Doval and the Foreign Secretary, all of them were in Poland and then to Ukraine with the Prime Minister. Shri Rajnath Singh was in the US signing important security agreements. So
yes.
Those ties are excellent. But at the same time, India also made sure the ties with Russia remain enduring and they are in their own space.
Yeah, and I was, in fact, Dr. Rao, the Ukrainian leader, President Volodymyr Zelensky was saying, we believe India can play a bigger role, and this is a big diplomatic breakthrough that Prime Minister Modi visited, because he said India is a big developing country, it's the leader of the developing world, and also because it's close to Russia.
Yes.
Unlike many other countries, we think that it can, pass these messages and convey our concerns, and it will be heard better by President Vladimir Putin and his advisors, because if India is telling it, the Western camp thinks that it will get a bigger audience, because otherwise the polarization is so extreme that nobody is willing to listen to anyone.
It's credibility and authenticity. I mean, India has worked hard to actually reach where it is, and there were so many naysayers, there were so many critics, and we've seen a lot of criticism coming our way. For the longest time, nobody understood in the West what India's security concerns were. Okay, having said that, I would be humble and say that even on India's side, we did not really have a full, mature understanding of why is it that Ukraine is fighting for its sovereignty, whatever. But what I'm saying is that this has to do with India's credibility and authenticity that India has built over the last 3 years. And now, of course, I think Prime Minister Modi is probably the only leader in the world that can go and have a one-to-one communication with President Putin, and in a very warm, in a very congenial manner. The same Prime Minister is going to be received in Kyiv with an equal warmth. And you saw that earnest sincerity with which the Prime Minister actually went to the Children's Memorial and actually paid his homage to the children who have lost their lives. So this is a kind of strategically autonomous stand of India, which is standing by the side of humanity, standing by the side of peace, which has got a good fillip, in my opinion. Yes.
I want to take you upon this human-centric approach, because Prime Minister Modi has been using this term, and he has been saying that the war should come to a close based on human-centric approaches which should protect lives, right? And this has caused huge casualties on both sides, and it's really destroyed large swaths of Eastern Europe. So this human-centric approach, humanity first. In fact, Prime Minister before arriving in Ukraine was in Poland, and he was addressing our diaspora, and he said that our approach to wars is humanity first, you know, and there let us talk a little bit about what kind of assistance we have given so far,
Sure.
and what more have been promised under the you know, the new agreements that have been signed with Ukraine, and you know, why is India coming forward as this first responder that is so successful globally, but more focused on this conflict, you know, and how does that help at all? I mean, some people would say, as long as the war is going on, this is just band-aid, and you know, it's synthetic and it's not really solving the big problem. But nobody has been able to solve the big problem. So our approach is, at least let us solve the small problems,
Sure.
isn't it?
Yeah.
And make small steps towards ultimately peace.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this human-centric and humanitarian support role, let's talk a bit about it.
Yeah, so for sure. I mean, that's what I said when this particular discourse that we now need to have about how active India's neutrality has been is actually coming from the role that India has played in the humanitarian efforts. Okay, so on the one hand, Prime Minister's visit did not come out of nowhere. You know, ever since the war started to now, there've been more than 40 times that the two sides have been talking. They've been interacting, whether it's a phone call, whether it's the sideline of different summits. But you see that there's a consistent dialogue which has been there. So the Prime Minister's visit, contrary to what a lot of people might want to argue in the West, is not coming because America asked us to do it. Okay, I mean, India has been very proactive anyway. I think these are voices that never really make the effort to go into the details of what really has India done. So this is not coming out of nowhere. That's the first thing. India has been you know, in touch. There've been high-level exchanges. I mentioned to you already, there were already deputy foreign ministers from Ukraine. The foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba himself had come, and every single time you had anybody from Ukraine, you always saw that they reaffirmed their faith in India's capabilities and always appreciated India for the humanitarian effort. Now, with respect to what have we done, we have so far sent about 17 consignments of humanitarian aid to Ukraine. We also, you know, recently when the Prime Minister was in Kyiv, we also gave them the Bhishma kits, which is a kind of a, you know, all the life-saving drugs and medications that you require at the front line, etc. So we sent them that. That's like a capsule kit, which is very effective, especially for the forces that are deployed at the front line, etc., when probably the medical aid cannot really reach so quickly. So we did that. And then if you look at the joint statement, which is a very historic joint statement because it's the first joint statement, you know, this is the first ever time for the Prime Minister to go to Kyiv. If you look at the joint statement is divided into certain areas, but there are about 9-10 key takeaways. Part of it, we signed about 4 agreements with Ukraine. In those 4 agreements, it's about India's role as a humanitarian provider, etc. We had some, you know, agreements on pharmaceuticals, on medicines. We had an agreement on agricultural produce because, of course, as you know, that Ukraine has been a breadbasket of the world, etc. So with respect to the humanitarian assistance, again, one part is what we are sending to Ukraine, which is a war zone, you know, which is where air sirens are raging day in and day out. The other part is about the reconstruction. And the joint statement mentions reconstruction, India's reconstruction efforts, because ultimately, whenever the war will end, Ukraine will need to be rebuilt. You know, the country is ravaged and devastated by the war, and in that sense, it would open an opportunity for India's investments. Okay, into that region. Now, whether India goes solo or goes embedded with the larger European collaborative effort is something that we will see. I think India would always keep its options open, but that investment will come, and we will have to rebuild the country. So for that, I think we need to start early. The discussions need to start early. Every single time there is a delegation level talk, you know, we always discuss reconstruction.
There was a mention of these quick impact development projects that we have done successfully in other war zones like Afghanistan and elsewhere, right? So we have a lot of experience of doing grassroots, small, micro level interventions that can help with livelihoods and you know, rebuilding and reconstruction, these kind of things.
So very quickly, I mean, when it comes to Ukraine, for example, I think this is the right time to also explore the viability of how India has been actually going about these things. So of course, we come with a wealth of experience and knowledge because India has been a committed actor to humanitarian support whenever and whenever and wherever in the world. We've always risen to the occasion. Now I think we should need more direct, more technical discussions, perhaps in good time, with how do we want to go about it. We have a line of credit system. We have also triangular cooperation, where we sort of join hands with the developed country to sort of bring about developmental changes, etc. And then we can also, of course, do it in whatever way possible. Like I said, that what is the European approach? So I think these kind of mechanisms should be discussed. They will be discussed. The joint statement also mentions the Intergovernmental Commission, which is now to be steered by the foreign minister level. So it is going to be Dimitri Kuleba on their part and our Dr. Jaishankar on our part. And the Intergovernmental Commission is going to have its meeting before the end of 2024, where we would see a lot of these discussions taking up again. But just one thing I'd like to mention, Dr. Chaulia, that all of this and all of this effort towards bringing peace and looking at innovative solutions that we've been discussing since the show started, they also get a fillip and they also get a push because we have genuine bilateral interests with Ukraine. Okay?
Of course.
Which is that, Ukraine is important for our defense diversification. That part of our Soviet fleet requires modernization. Part of our, in fact, the whole front line of our warships, in the Navy, they are all using Ukrainian engines. And what a lot of people do not know is that the technical military cooperation with Ukraine has been very steady before the war. After the war, it became classified, I think for obvious reasons, but it is continuing. And it also finds a mention in the joint statement. And so what I'm trying to say is...
So we do pursue our material interests also, and
so it's
we are not just there, we are not just there as a do-gooder, but also because we have core bilateral interests and regional interests to pursue. And
that is the core of our strategic autonomy. I mean, it's like, why India is on India's side. What does it mean? Of course, so there are core commitments that we have with respect to our worldview of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, a pro-people's approach, of standing by peace, of saying again and again that we come from the land of Buddha and not Yuddha. So this is another thing that Prime Minister has been saying it again and again. But at the same time, we have genuine national interests. So all of this, I mean, if you see that, in my opinion, when I look at this, whatever dehyphenation that we've been trying to do, this is also about checking all boxes. And also, I think there's one part that we don't really talk about, which is that eventually we will see that Ukraine, with all this investment that we are doing in Ukraine, which is a very pro-people investment, which, all that, this is also going to ensure Ukraine becoming a sort of a gateway for us into Europe. Because ultimately, when the reconstruction will happen, we will be interested in Indian workers going there. And that kind of a cheap labor, but not cheap standards, is something which the European Union would also want to tap into.
Yes.
Okay. So these are futuristic things, and we don't really have a blueprint for them right now, but we definitely can see that this is where this is leading to. And for that, we need, an independent approach and an independent thinking.
Right. Dr. Rao, we are running out of time, but last point on what does this do to India's stature as a rising power? Because like we've discussed, a rising power and multi-alignment go hand in hand, and now we have a higher profile and visibility on the world stage, and people are saying that India has the key to solving some of the most intractable problems. So it's in that kind of context, tell our audiences why this move to balance both sides and to be there and to show sympathy and empathy to war victims. All these things, they add up to something bigger, isn't it? I mean, compared to China, for example, which has taken a very blatant and partisan approach, our approach is totally different. And there, what does this do to us? And going forward, could we leverage this to do more such efforts worldwide, wherever there are crises and problems? There was an era way back in the 1950s when we used to do these kind of interventions for world peace, quote unquote. But now, a stronger India, more materially capable India, we can also give more to other countries. So let's finish the show by talking about this, and what does this indicate to you going forward? This kind of proactiveness should ultimately bring home our dividend, which is to be accepted as a major power or a great power in the world. And as we go forward, this, I think, is the right path.
Dr. Chaulia, it just makes me sort of, think about this thing, which is that a lot of times when great powers have the unipolar moment in the world, they have, for some reason, for some tragic reason, always gone on a rampage, killing, looting, regime change, whatnot, right?
Interventions,
interventions and all that. But when you look at the rise of India, okay, you can totally see that this is a different kind of a rise, which is committed to peace, committed to humanitarian effort. And I think what all
non-expansionist,
non-expansionist, always committed to peace. And what I wish to state here is that India is extremely mindful of its capabilities. India is extremely mindful of expanding its capabilities, maximizing its capabilities. And you see the entire Indian machinery sort of, devoted to that. But at the same time, we have not lost the vision of what really truly makes our country spectacular, the civilizational legacy and everything. And I think ultimately the kind of role that we are playing is basically just two things. One is to substantiate all our claims of being a Vishwaguru, where we can actually, show light to the world, which is really devastated right now, because it's not just Ukraine. You also know what is happening in West Asia and what can happen in Taiwan Straits and everything everywhere else. So that's one. The Vishwaguru and the Vishwabandhu, those visions become more substantiated, get more credibility and credence with what India is doing, because everything ultimately is going to be measured up against what you have done on the ground. So that's one. And the other part is that this is a reiteration and recognition of the fact that the world is increasingly becoming one. So the theaters are getting linked. Okay, you cannot really sort of remain disinterested and say that that has got nothing to do with us, because today the kind of technology that we are living in, the kind of artificial intelligence, all the critical and emerging technology, the way the economic linkages are, the friendshoring is happening and resilience of supply chains. I think this is also India's way of interpreting that, the world is one, the world's problems are one, and it would have both a spiritual, so to say, connotation of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, but also a very material and a very, practical connotation that India has to rise up to the occasion, because the world looks at India.
So viewers, what a fascinating conversation with Dr. Swasti Rao. The sum of it is that there's so many unique measures and solutions that India is bringing to the table as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned. India has been a stabilizing force and a force for moral and human decency. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, you saw the visuals where he was moved by when he visited the National History Museum in Kiev in Ukraine, and he has repeatedly said that we cannot accept the carnage of innocent civilians like this, and something needs to be done. And it's not just talk, we are walking the talk and doing so many mini interventions to try and make this bloody conflict less destructive, and of course ultimately hopefully to end this bloody conflict. But so far what India has done is nothing short of a kind of a balancing act that is being appreciated by all sides. Imagine if we had just gone with one or the other, we would have ended up with a lot more trouble and with less leverage and less standing like this. So when you see the contrasting visuals of Prime Minister Modi hugging Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, think about who is in the middle, who is in the center of this whole drama. It's India. So we are very much there, and I think the world is looking up to India to continue to provide solutions. Let me thank Dr. Swasti Rao always for very erudite and insightful thoughts.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Viewers, the Russia-Ukraine war is not going to end anytime soon, it looks, but efforts are on. India has come forward and said that we will do everything possible within our might to try and bring about peace, and in the interim we are willing to go to any lengths to support those who are working for decent, humane outcomes. So do follow India's diplomacy on the Russia-Ukraine war. I can tell you that very few countries can match what we have done, and this is going to continue to be a glorious saga in the history of Indian foreign policy, the way we have managed this very, very divisive subject which has torn the world apart. We have held our heads high and we continue to be solution providers. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.